Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, April 1st, 2:27 p.m. This is Senate Education. We're going to start by picking up the conversation on H26, our addressing the needs and conditions of public schools. We're going to then take a shift to S75. And I'm sorry, Senator Terenzini, but understandably, Senator Terenzini had a loss in his family, is not here, but this is his bill. But we are going to continue our work on S75, which is an act relating to screening students for dyslexia, then move back to H26, school facilities, and then wrap it up with COVID relief funding, parts of the conversation we didn't get to yesterday. And then a quick preview of tomorrow, lead, radon, and PCBs. We'll hear from Mike O'Grady, Ledge Counsel, and David Englander from the Department of Health. I've asked Stephanie or Dr. Heather Boucher to come in to talk about standardized testing during COVID. And Jeff Fannin, I asked him to come in and talk a little bit about the potential teacher shortage that we're facing. And then we'll also return possibly to H26, depending on whether or not Ms. Ryan and Mr. Carroll have had an opportunity to talk and come up with a solution on that as it relates to responsibilities of either the agency or the state board. So with that, Mr. Francis, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. As you know, we're talking about H26, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Pleased to be with the committee here today. I'm going to talk about H426, which is a bill that's passed the House. I'm speaking today for the Superintendent's Association, the School Boards Association, and the Vermont Principals Association. I've submitted you 2 pages of testimony, and I'm going to just run right through that because that's the best way to convey my thoughts. First and foremost, I wanted to let you know that our association support 426 as it was approved by the House with one significant recommendation. We believe that the need for the bill reflects the reality that there's been a moratorium on school construction aid since 2007. The bill also recognizes the need to move forward with the restoration of school construction aid and provide improved stewardship for school facilities statewide. The bill supports both of these efforts by creating a better understanding of what we are facing related to school infrastructure needs. The simple recognition that Vermont is contending with an aging school infrastructure would alone affirm the importance of passing 426 or a similar bill. When you consider our growing, and I would say collectively growing awareness of the critical need for dealing with environmental and energy conservation interests, as well as the importance of updating school environments to meet the needs of modern day learners, the bill becomes even more compelling. And also, given the reality of constrained monetary resources and the demographic changes the state is experiencing, the ability to inform future policy decisions through information that will result from the activities supported by the bill is useful and important. With respect to the specific provisions of the bill, we're happy to provide the following comments. Section 1 sets forth findings that are useful in contextualizing the need for the bill. Section 2 requires updates to the school construction facility standards and the school capital outlay formula. Both measures will be necessary and useful in an orderly progression to both restoring aid for school construction and making determinations about how to fund and prioritize school facility projects in the future. I listened to the testimony by State Board Chair John Carroll earlier this week regarding the reluctance on the part of the State Board to take responsibility for revisions to the capital outlay formula. We can support an amendment to the bill to assign the capital outlay formula update to the Agency of Education. Section 3, we feel, is particularly important. It directs the Agency of Education, working in coordination with the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, to commission an assessment of all school buildings statewide. This is a very useful and necessary provision because it will establish baseline data that will inform a general understanding of facilities conditions statewide and cover a useful array of categories. The assessment is comprehensive and covers building age, condition, learning environment, systems integrity, and will support prioritization for future investment in building upgrades and strategic investment. The data from the assessment will be maintained at the Agency of Education and will establish a baseline record that will support work and decision-making into the future. Section 4 charges the Secretary of Education with reporting to the General Assembly with a recommendation for establishing a funding source that responds to the inventory needs and conditions of schools statewide. This is an essential feature of the bill. Section 5 and 6 promote the useful concept of shared statewide stewardship for school buildings by requiring that every school district have a position, and I would say it won't be a new position, but a person designated specifically with responsibility for facilities, and that the designee receive appropriate training and certification. In addition, school districts will be required to establish and maintain a 5-year capital improvement plan. And then finally, Section 7 grants the Agency of Education one limited service position supported by ESSER funds through January 23 in support of the work outlined above. In earlier drafts of the bill in the House, there were 2 positions that were permanent positions at the AOE. Our belief is that the position should be permanent. In the past, the agency had staff specifically dedicated to school facilities work, and if current infrastructure and future investments are to be sufficiently protected, the state should invest in the human resources necessary to accomplish that. Currently, the appropriation for the bill is all ESSER, including the assessment of statewide buildings, which I think is fine. It's just that it's the positions at the AOE that we think need some permanence. So in summary, we think this is a bill that is useful. I think that it's necessary in order to get a better handle on state facilities than we have right now. It contends with the fact that we have an aging infrastructure, but it turns into the future with regard to what we want our school facilities to be. So those are general comments in support of the bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. So you support a agency or the state board's request to shift some of these responsibilities to AOE. Did you have any other amendments or concerns with the bill? Did I miss something? Or in general?
No. I mean, the substantive comment, and I'll add here that the House spent a fair amount of time on this bill, and including in the last biennium. That was interrupted by COVID. The facilities managers, other parties of interest spent a fair amount of time supporting the work in the House Education Committee on the bill. So we think it's a good bill. My belief is that if the state is going to support school district infrastructure, which is a bona fide state policy interest into the future, that it would be better if the AOE was allotted permanent positions and funding for those positions. If you said to me, Jeff, that's not possible, we're going to get started with this bill as is and fund that position at the Agency of Education in a limited service position using ESSER money, I wouldn't object to that. I think ultimately the agency and the General Assembly will make a determination that they're going to need staff capacity at the AOE. But the most important thing is that let this legislation or legislation like it get implemented this year, because with the moratorium since 2007 and an infrastructure that is aging with all kinds of emerging concerns that go to safety, security, environmental concerns, which you're going to hear about tomorrow, what constitutes a modern learning environment the state of Vermont really should make school buildings a specific area of focus. And I think that this bill sets that process up in a pretty efficient manner.
Okay. Yes, Senator Person.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Francis, can you tell me where the school construction facility standards, where I'd find those?
I could email them to you. The agency's got a document. John Carroll referenced it, I think 2007, 2008. I actually thought it was 2006, but I can send you from the AOE website links to those standards so that you can take a look at them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I know others have been looking for those for us, so I would appreciate if you would do that, Mr. Francis. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks for all of your work on this in the House. And, your question about the Agency of Education and Staffing is one that we also have been talking about in a more broader context and are working on language that would consider an audit of the agency, comparing it to other likely states, just to give us and Vermonters a context for what we're able to ask, what they need, what we would like them to be able to do, and what they can realistically do. And I think if we can, this was Senator Lyon's idea, if we could get that kind of guiding document, if you will, I think it would really help us going forward.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Senator Hooker.
I just was thinking that this addresses the idea of whether or not positions should be permanent. In other cases, we've said, it'll take somebody from the agency. They'll take somebody from the agency to oversee this, but it seems as if the agency is pretty strapped as far as people power. So you can see.
Yeah, and if I may comment, the agency had staff dedicated to school construction past 2007 when the moratorium was put into place until around 2011 or 2012. And then it sort of just went away, right? Because there was no state assistance for facilities. The Superintendent's Association, and Senator Pertzlick's well familiar with this, from 1994 until about 2018 or 19, we ran a school energy management program, which a gentleman by the name of Norm Etkin directed. He worked with me for 12 years. And so the Superintendent's Association has a lot of experience working with school districts, particularly in the area of energy conservation. I have familiarity with the needs of school districts. I think we've come through an era where the priorities for schools have been pretty diverse. And I think that, through all the improvement to education in other ways, the state lost focus with regard to what's a massive asset in terms of our school buildings. And now, as we are well into the 21st century, it makes sense to pay attention to those buildings in ways that in some places they haven't for the last several years. And when we worked on this bill in the House, we really were trying to create an outline and a framework so that we would touch all the relevant pieces. And one relevant piece is a baseline. What do we have for school conditions right now? But the upgrade to the standards and the capital outlay formula are really intended to make sure that we're current with regard to what school buildings should be. So, this is just a start, but I think it's a good start, and it actually coincides with the Biden's infrastructure bill. If he passes that, that's going to be $100 billion nationally, and it will really serve us well to know what the condition of our school buildings are, so that when we start to make an investment, either as a result of federal money or state money, it can be targeted into the best places possible. So that's really what this is. And, you know, it's not the kind of thing that people typically get excited about, but I think we should be enthusiastic about the prospects because there is a lot of need out there that's not well understood right now. We're trying to understand it better so we can get to work improving it.
Senator Lyons.
So, I mean, you raised so many very important issues with your testimony and then in the discussion. I know a few years ago, it's a long time ago, I met with some superintendents about doing some shared energy purchasing. And then when we were on finance, we talked about some shared administrative purchasing. And I just wonder if we have these capital plans available and they're shared with the Board of Education or someplace else, there might be some efficiencies to be had with, I don't know what, with roofing, HVAC, that there could be some benefit, not just to the school, but also to local businesses through some kind of coordinated activity. So,
Yeah, I think that I agree with that statement. The work that that Efficiency Vermont and VEIC has facilitated with schools with regard to HVAC, that Senator Perslick took the lead on in the last biennium has been immensely valuable. I work pretty closely with the folks at Efficiency in Vermont and VEIC, and I think when that bill was passing, I put a critical eye on it with the intent of using my knowledge and experience to improvement. And sometimes I'll enter the room and people will say, what's he here to tell us we did do or didn't do? But it's really always in the spirit of trying to get things done better. And the partners that we have, like VEIC, have just been fantastic. In addition to that, because of COVID, the regional groups of superintendents, of which there are 5, have never worked more closely than they are right now. And there's all kinds of opportunity to capitalize on the relationships that have been built in COVID, coming out of COVID. So Senator Lyons, I agree with you more. I mean, I could not agree with you more. I think we need to be constantly on the lookout for ways to work together better. And I do believe that this bill sets that process up pretty nicely.
Thank you. Thank you both. Any other questions? Senator Perslick, please.
Just when you were, Mr. Francis, talking about SEMP, the School Energy Management Program, and reminded me of that we're doing some changes to SEMP, the State Energy Management Program, to allow them to work in municipalities, of which schools would count. So I just wonder, I'm thinking out loud about maybe some language in here to make that connection more pronounced and highlighted, that the State Energy Management Program be a resource for the schools. And I guess I bring it up just to see if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, without getting too long-winded, the School Energy Management Program at VSA was highly successful. And we actually ended that program because Efficiency Vermont, who was using us as their agent, changed their funding model. So I think it's worth considering. Yeah, I don't know exactly how it would be incorporated, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that if you have an interest in that outside this process, in a conversation just between the two of us. I'd be happy to follow up with you on that.
Okay, we'll talk offline.
That'd be great. Thank you both. Okay, any final comments, Mr. Francis?
No, thank you very much. I'm going to continue to watch via YouTube, so I'll sign off now, but I am going to watch the S75 discussion.
Okay, terrific.
But thank you very much. Take care.
Mr. Fannin, thanks for joining us. Being April 1st, and you were a big advocate for H81 and its timing, I'm wondering if you might give us an update on H81.
I believe, it's in transit to the governor's office. That's
Mhm.
my understanding. Last I knew just a few hours ago. So I don't know if it's coming, the clerk usually has a couple days to massage language or correct Scrivener's errors or whatever the case may be. And I think they're doing that, although it's not like the end of the session when there's a flood of bills heading over to the governor's office. I think there's not been that many. I think this is just one. So I imagine today or tomorrow, I guess, it'll head over and bargaining officially opened up today. Although I don't know if they actually have a meeting scheduled today, but
And so
So-
if the governor were to sign
it's in
that,
progress.
if the governor were to sign that in a week, is that still, I don't know. I mean, I know ideally you would have had it signed by now, but is that going to work? For
You broke up there a second, or maybe it
I'm
was
sorry.
me, but I think the answer is I think that's sufficient time for people to adjust and we're not too far down the road. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Okay, thank you. Okay, any questions for Mr. Fannin on that before we shift to have him talk about S-875? All right, so S-75, this is a bill that we had a walkthrough on, Mr. Fannin, prior to crossover. And it is about screening students for dyslexia. You have a copy of the bill. Any comments, any thoughts?
Yeah, just a few. And it sort of echoes what I talked about when I testified earlier about the literacy bills. And I think those are probably a little bit more in line with what we're thinking. We don't support S-75. I'll just say that up front. And I'm just concerned about the definition and just the singular focus on one learning disorder. And I think that's the gist of it right there is we teachers are constantly assessing their students, and some students have particular challenges and others have different challenges. And each teacher, as I testified earlier on the literacy bill, the focus of a teacher is to learn what each student needs and focus then and target attentions to address those particular needs of that particular student. So just screening all students, if you will, for dyslexia, I don't think is productive and may lead to false positives and a host of, waterfall events thereafter. If you're not dyslexic, which is, it's not a specific diagnosis. It's a term to describe a multitude of learning disorders that a struggling student may have. So the interventions must be tailored to that particular issue that particular student is having. So if we're overly focusing on one aspect of screening, I just don't think it's productive for kids. And frankly, it's not useful and efficient for schools to be doing so. So that's, that is what our concern is. And we think that the more general literacy bills that are moving and advancing, we think are the better approach to address reading challenges that students do have. So I don't have, the singular focus on dyslexia means, for us at least, there's a lot that could be said. It doesn't need to be said. That's our challenge is that. So I'll leave it at that and happy to try to answer any questions. I'm not a reading expert, but I know I've, chatting with some colleagues and that's the concern we have.
Questions for Mr. Fannin? Senator Chittenden.
Sure. So thank you, Jeff, for chiming in on this. I received an email from a couple of people whose opinion I highly respect, and they expressed similar concerns. So it's useful for you to express these concerns here in the discussion today, so that we definitely take a closer look at how this bill could help address this situation in a meaningful way. I don't have a question because a lot of this is very technical and I'm still reading up on it, but if you have advice on where I could focus my attention to better understand dyslexia and dyslexia screening, I would welcome any thoughts you have.
Sure. And I'll say not too much of an introduction to Mary Lundeen, but I know that she and Chelsea have been pretty focused on this, Chelsea Myers from VSA. And I think that they are two really good resources. And I've chatted with Chelsea about some of this a few weeks ago. So I think that, you know, we have some good resources here in the state, and folks who are coming your way. And I think they're a very good resource in this regard.
You know, it's interesting, and we'll take this up with other witnesses as well. But, you know, we have heard from parents and associations, if you will, that represent, you know, advocating for students with dyslexia, saying that, you know, if only their child had been tested earlier for this, it would have provided him or her with an opportunity to get the support they needed early on, and therefore they would be, you know, better off now as a 5th grader or a 7th grader or a 12th grader. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, certainly, you know, under the IDEA, the Individuals Disability Education Act, schools are required to assess kids and identify special needs when they're having, you know, learning difficulties. So it's not a perfect science, but schools are already obligated to do that under federal and state rules. So you know, kids present at different ways and different times. I can't speak to those particulars. I've also heard of people going to outside agencies to have their child assessed. No issues were found, and then going back to the school, and the school doubling down and going back and saying, no, we think there are some concerns. So the folks on the ground, the folks who are actually teaching students,
Yeah.
I've heard it both ways, Senator. And so relying on the folks who are working, the teachers who are working with kids day in, day out, whose job it is to assess his or her students daily and regularly, and tailor interventions that work for that child. That's what we're paying these these professionals to do. And they're trained well. And if we need to beef up training, that's a different thing. But I think we are all focused on learning. We understand under Act 173, for example, that reading is a huge component of learning. And I can go on about Act 173. It needs to be implemented fully and resourced properly, which it has not been since its inception in 2018. But that's a different matter. But it is related in as much as we know that reading is important for kids and their learning success. So I think, going back to your question in particular, I don't know that focusing one screening on every single kid,
Right,
seems to do, is the right approach. I think we ought to beef up, make sure that the screening we are doing for kids and assessments with teachers, if you will, is more robust.
yeah. And, you know, it'll be helpful when we have Ms. Lundeen, who's up next, maybe take us through a little bit about, you know, around what happens. In other words, how are certain students chosen for this kind of test, that kind of test, what general screening looks like once students are identified.
And I too can bring in some teachers. This was fairly short notice for us, but if you need some folks from the field who do this kind of work on a day in, day out basis, happy to get you some people there too.
Great. No, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Fannin? Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks for the work on the bill that hopefully is on the governor's desk today.
Okay. Keep us posted.
I will do. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Ms. Lundeen. How are you?
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today.
And I apologize, you have been to committee already. Is that correct? Or is this your first time in this year?
It's the first time with your committee. I did provide testimony to House Ed earlier this year.
Well, thanks for joining us in Senate Ed. You know the bill that we're looking at and the discussion we're having, and you may have heard me just mention to Mr. Fannin our hope that one of the things we hope you might do is just take us through also how certain students are identified as needing special ed support, what that looks like on the ground. If you're a teacher, you have X number of 3rd graders, you know, how are students identified? What's that path for those children and their families? So, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'd like to just start by introducing myself. I'm Mary Lundeen. I am the president of the Vermont Council of Special Ed Administrators. I'm also the director of special services for the Mount Mansfield School District, serving the communities of Jericho, Richmond, Underhill, Bolton, and Huntington. And I also just wanted to share that I am an educator who is a licensed reading specialist and do have a master's in reading. And before I answer your questions, I just wanted to offer just a couple of thoughts. So I wanted to start just by saying that VCSEA agrees that we must improve instructional practice to ensure that all learners are able to read and that schools have the necessary interventions to support struggling readers. And we also recognize that school districts across the state are in different stages of MTSS development and implementation due to financial constraints and resources. And then also really pointing to the DMG report and the Vermont Agency of Education MTSS Field Guide. And both of those documents point to that it's.
Could you just, no acronyms if possible?
Sure.
So I'm new to this, so remind me, DMG?
So the DMG report, that stands for the District Management Group. And that was a group that was hired, I believe it was 2 years ago. And they came in and they did a pilot where they were visiting, observing, interviewing teachers in 10 schools across Vermont. And they were really looking at instruction and looking at data and looking at efficiencies. And so they developed a report based on those 10 schools, and that was shared with the legislature. And that was one of the pieces that was really important in informing Act 173. And so that group has continued to offer support to educators in the state around what are the necessary steps that we need to take to successfully work toward implementation of 173. So that report identified 5 key components to ensure success for us with 173. The first being a systemic and comprehensive approach to our work, that we need to have high quality instruction and intervention. We must have a comprehensive assessment system in our schools. We need effective collaboration, and we need teacher expertise. Yeah. So those are the 5 levers that are really, really important to the success of a multi-tiered system of support and successful implementation of 173. And so when I think about investing in teacher expertise, that's what's going to have the lasting capacity to teach all children to read and identify those students who require additional support and help us identify the high quality interventions that are necessary to help our struggling readers. VCSEA does understand that there has been compelling testimony in support of legislation to require specific screening tools for dyslexia. We believe that there will be unintended consequences with this type of approach. And the reasons are, this concern stems primarily from the risk in focusing too narrowly on a measure for a single disability at the expense of schools developing a broad, comprehensive assessment system within MTSS. A comprehensive assessment system is what will identify all learners who struggle, including those with dyslexia. And systems change is what is needed to realize the promise of Act 173 and to improve reading outcomes for students. And I just wanted to share two experiences that I've had that I think are pretty powerful. One was as a teacher and the other was as an administrator. So as a teacher, the elementary school where I worked was the recipient of the Federal Reading Excellence Award grant. So this was under the Clinton administration back in the late 90s. And at that time, my school, when we looked at the data, 20% of our students in K-5 were meeting the standard in literacy, 20%. In 4 short years, we were able to flip that so that 80% of our students were meeting the grade level standard. And that was back when we were using the test that was called the NSRE. So that was the late 90s. And what happened in that school, the reason for that is that was real systemic change. That was done through deep, comprehensive learning as a faculty and staff. And we built capacity. All teachers were trained to be literacy experts. That meant all classroom teachers, all special educators, the PE teacher, the art teacher, the music teachers, everyone, the paraeducators were included in that professional development. And it was done in collaboration with the University of Vermont, the Stern Center. And what we did is we gave our teachers the knowledge and the skills to be able to teach kids reading, how to read. Right. And that's what's necessary. And so we continued to sustain that as new teachers were hired. The expectation was that as part of the hiring, that they would be trained in how to teach reading, and that the expectation was, this is the amount of time that reading will happen, and you have no flexibility in that. And what I want to emphasize about that story is that the PD was focused and intentional. It was not teachers deciding, oh, this workshop looks really interesting, I'm going to go take this, or, oh, I'm going to go off and do this course on my own. We looked at what were the components to teach reading, and the school professional development was designed around that, with all of us taking the same coursework, the same trainings, the same coaching. And so that's really, really important. And then my second example is, as a former superintendent, my district was one of 2 to be awarded a multi-million-dollar grant from the Nellie Mae Foundation. And the intent of that grant was on school transformation. And that multi-year grant paved the way for Act 77 in Vermont, personalized learning plans, and proficiency-based learning. It was that deep, deep learning that we did, and learning about best practices that really led to some of those changes. So I felt it was really important to share my stories with you, because they really speak to the power of systems change and how that is what we really need to be doing. I now would like to just speak to the testimony you heard from parents and advocates in support of legislation to require the screening tools for dyslexia.
Sure. Let's just take a pause there, just because there might be some questions related to what you've already covered, which is all terrific. And I'll just kick it off. One of the things we did here, and it sounds like you've implemented and we're working to implement through some literacy legislation, is training teachers. We're also asking for an assessment of the institutions of higher ed, because it also sounds to me like you were working with teachers that left their institutions of higher education without these skills. Is that accurate?
I would agree with that. Yeah. And I think, as someone who, as I shared with you, I do have a master's in reading. So right. I focused for 2 years on reading. Mm-hmm. As an undergrad, in my undergrad program, I probably had 2 courses in how to teach reading.
Okay. Yeah, we heard the teachers that, two in particular from Williamstown, they also had shared with us that they arrived ready to teach, but weren't equipped to teach reading. And then they too went through, like you said, some specific certain training. It wasn't as though they could just go out on their own workshop and find it. And this training really, I think a number of teachers in the Williamstown Elementary School really transformed those reading skills, across the board. So, Senator Lyons.
Well, actually, it's related to what you were saying, Senator Campion, but my question is, first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for being in my Senate district, because it's a great value added. But I was going to ask you, how do you identify teachers who might need support and then sort of work with them? How do you make those improvements? I mean, it would seem to me it's quite difficult to know everything going on in the classroom. And so just maybe some thoughts about that.
So I think for me, what this really boils down to is that we need to do more training with our teachers, all of our teachers in the area of reading. And that starts with good first instruction from the classroom teacher. And so what schools need to do is basically it starts with the standards. So looking at the Common Core state standards and identifying what are the priority standards for our district, which means that if students are in my classroom or they're in the classroom across the hall from me, same grade level, the guarantee is that all children that leave that grade level will have been taught the same things. It will not be the teachers just picking and choosing, but it will be agreed upon. And then the second piece of that is the common assessments that we need to develop that are tied to the standards. And that's where administrators can be looking at data with teachers, and the data tells the story. So if there is a teacher whose students may not be up to the same level as some of the other teachers in that grade level, then that needs to be a conversation that's happening and looking at what is going on for that teacher. But I think some of the conversations that are happening right now is it's going to be part of the interview process for a lot of schools, really, as we are hiring new teachers, really looking at people who have depth of knowledge in the area of literacy, but also arranging in our districts for some of that training to happen. The one thing my district does that has been very powerful for our teachers is we have coaches, district coaches. So I have a literacy coach for K4. We have a literacy coach for 5-8, and they are literacy experts. And they are working with the teachers around identifying those priority standards, creating those assessments, looking at units of design, looking at the data with them, training the teachers in some of the best practices, and then they're going into classrooms and working alongside teachers who need extra support. That is what is changing practice. And that is the best model. And I think a lot of schools are starting to move in that direction. And I know you were talking about Williamstown, and I think they are doing some of that too.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay.
Is it okay if I just share some of my points around the dyslexia screener? Okay.
Thank you.
So I do want to speak to the testimony that you heard from parents and advocates in support of legislation to require the screening tool. VCSEA does not support requiring school districts to use a dyslexia screener for students K-12 for the following reasons. And I did share this research article with Jessie. So I think she has that. So the first is, and Jeff Fannin was speaking to this earlier, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the acronym is IDEA, and the Vermont Special Education Rules and Regulations already require school districts to identify students who may have an IDEA eligible disability through our child find requirements. So there is also a recent Supreme Court ruling called the Andrew F. case that was in 2018 that also requires school district to evaluate children who may have a suspected disability. So you can't wait. If the parent, if the classroom teacher, if a pediatrician, if anyone has a concern that a child has a disability, then we are required to bring together the evaluation planning team and look at the data and hear the concerns that people have. And as a team, decide if we're going to move forward with that special education evaluation, or if the team feels that they want to try some other interventions before moving in that direction. So that is a requirement that already exists within the federal and state rules, and school districts, like I said, are required to follow that. So if a child is suspected of having a reading disability, that is a way for us to look at, would that child be someone who would meet the criteria as having a specific learning disability in the area of reading. So that is the first reason. The second one is there's little research to support the effectiveness of a dyslexia screening tool. So the research that we've looked at, the screeners have an extremely high rate of false positives. Some studies point to a 50 to 60% error rate. Identifying all struggling readers as possibly having dyslexia masks the true problem with literacy instruction. And that's a lack of effective expert reading instruction for all learners. Screening instruments are inherently inconsistent across schools, resulting in very limited predictive validity. And that's the reason, because teachers may not be calibrated. They may not be administering the tool the same way. And there's a lot to think about with that one. There's no direct positive relationship between screening assessments and reading outcomes. And screening instruments do not provide diagnostic or instructional information as to why the student is underperforming. Without information to inform instruction or understand the why, educators can't take action on behalf of the student. Screenings and benchmark assessments are already part of a comprehensive assessment system within MTSS. So going back to those 5 levers that have been identified, that's the third one for successful implementation of 173 and building a robust MTSS. And the big part, or the big one, is districts must focus on developing the system rather than focusing narrowly on one content area. So really going back to that professional development and thinking about the necessary components in MTSS for 173 to be successful. So with that, VCSEA does have some recommendations, but I'll stop and take questions if anyone has.
And I'm just
any.
looking at the clock. We don't have a lot of time to hear from everyone. So if you want to just move right into your recommendations, that would be great.
Sure. Okay, great. So there are only 2, and we recommend investing in building teacher expertise. Good first instruction is the hallmark of an effective MTSS, and it requires an expert classroom teacher. That's what leads to systems change and improve outcomes for all students. And I just point to the story that I shared with you when I was a teacher. VCSEA does agree that our K-2 teachers must develop expertise in the science of teaching reading, especially the foundational skills of phonological awareness and phonemic awareness as part of a comprehensive literacy program. And then our second recommendation is to provide districts with professional development money to develop and fully implement a robust MTSS. And as I mentioned earlier, that is a struggle for many districts, and it can be an obstacle to them getting the rich PD that's necessary to develop the teacher expertise in their building. Solid instruction and solid assessment is what will allow schools to identify our struggling learners. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we are just really at the tip of the iceberg in terms of these issues. And I think we are going to, as you know, we passed out a literacy bill. The House has a literacy bill. We'll figure that out. But I think we're going to continue along this theme, I think, for many years, if you will, until we feel like we've got everything in place. So if you haven't already submitted your testimony, I hope you will, because I think there are a number of important pieces in there that I don't want to lose. Senator Perslick.
Thank you, Ms. Lundeen. Since you didn't testify in our committee, so that means you didn't testify in S114, but I assume you've looked at it. Have you seen that bill?
Could you tell me the name of the bill?
Senator Campion reported.
It's a literacy, improving literacy pre-K,
Okay.
Something like that.
But I mean, you don't have to answer right now, but it would be great to have you look at that, because that's kind of the bill in play together with the House bill, and see. I think we ended up in that bill doing your recommendations, which is probably not a coincidence, but it would be good to get your take on that bill.
Okay, sure. Great, thanks.
And one of the things that we have learned through this or I have learned, is that people like yourself, and I put Kelsey Myers in this category, and Libby Bonesteel in this category, people that really know a lot about this issue, this topic, and we're so grateful because we are hoping to partner with you for a long time going forward. It's really important work, and really appreciate your dedication to it.
Thank you.
Senator Hooker.
I guess I'm really impressed with all of the work that you're doing and you've done. But I'm looking at S75 and the number of people who had signed on to that bill. And I think that we all signed on to it thinking that, we were going to address the needs of these students who are having difficulty reading. My concern, and I would hazard that the concern of many who signed on to it, was that there are kids who fall through the cracks. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm happy that in our literacy bill, I think we've addressed many of your concerns about teacher preparation and the like, but how do we guarantee that kids don't fall through the cracks, so that we don't have those parents coming to us who have kids in 7th and 8th and 12th grade saying, if only this had happened. So I need some comfort there.
Yeah. So I do go back to the child find requirement, and because I don't know all of the stories firsthand, my first question would be, did the parent request a special education evaluation when they had concerns about their child? And a school district can't refuse to do that. So did that happen? And again, really looking at what was the first instruction that the student got. It's hard to identify someone as having a disability if they have not been provided with the first instruction, and that is in IDEA. So lack of instruction is a reason for someone to not be found eligible, which kind of goes back to my point about why it's imperative that teachers know how to teach reading, so that all students are getting that good first instruction, and it's covering all the components of literacy. A screener isn't going to help with that. It's not going to tell us what are the pieces that are missing for that child.
And I would think that in conjunction with that, teachers who could recognize problems that kids were having and would then make the recommendation to the parents so that they would then have the child screen. So along with teaching the teachers how to teach reading is to recognize when reading is difficult for one of the students.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we'll also have you back in at some point, Ms. Lundin, to just talk even more broadly about your work in special education and see if there are things, and maybe later this spring if we have a time slot, or even next year. I think it would be really helpful to us if you'd be willing to do that.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Okay. Please feel free to stick around. We also realize you're probably very busy, so if you want to also need to go, we understand that. But thank you for those comments. Ms. Tolman, thanks for being with us. I guess one way to think about this would be things that you may have heard from Ms. Lundin that you disagree with, as well as maybe agree with, and then any new information you think this committee needs to have. So with that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Jackie Ramsey Tolman, and I come to you today with nearly 3 decades of experience. Much of that has been serving Vermont as a special educator, and I am now serving the state of Vermont and Essex Westford School District in particular as the Director of Learning and Instructional Impact. And I'm here presenting today with one of our literacy coaches in our district to highlight some of the work that we are currently doing. As I listened to Ms. Lundin and her testimony today, I was thinking that our testimony really is about supplementing much of what she has said about the systemic approach that is absolutely critical and necessary if we are truly going to close the gaps for our learners in literacy in the state of Vermont. So we're going to speak to you today some about our approach in literacy assessment, also specifically to the dyslexia question, but then I hope to also talk with you about our systemic approach and the essential components that we have put into place in Essex Westford that are resulting in positive changes for our students. So Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Kate McCauley, and as Jackie mentioned, I am one of the literacy coaches for Essex Westford. This year I'm primarily focused on K-1. Prior to joining Essex Westford, I have worked as a literacy specialist K-6 and 7-12, and I also teach part-time at NVU Johnson, where I teach a literacy intervention assessment and strategies course, and I'm currently in my 11th semester teaching that class. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and something I live and breathe every day. In front of you, I believe you have a graphic that was shared with all of you that kind of outlines the complexity of reading. And I think that that's a really important place to start because as you can see, decoding and phonological awareness are part of one pathway that a reader must integrate in order to get to that ultimate goal of comprehension, which is the whole purpose of reading, right? To make sense of what we read. So I think it's really important that we look at this model, which comes from McKenna, Stahl, and Flanagan, and it's in a textbook called Assessment for Reading Instruction that I know is used at NVU Johnson, at St. Mike's, and UVM as well. And I think it just does a really nice job of highlighting how complex reading really is and what a reader must do and integrate in order to get to that goal of comprehension. So in our model here, you can see that there are 3 pathways. And as I mentioned, a reader must use and integrate all of these different skills and possess them to complete the act of reading.
Macaulay, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just
Sure.
saying, Jeannie, did you receive this document? I just don't see it on.
I can screen share it if you would like.
Let's see if Jeannie has it.
I don't know if I have it if I can't see it. So
Did you
If it's
receive?
not posted, if it's not posted, I didn't get it.
Okay. Do you remember to whom you sent it, Ms. McCauley?
I forwarded it to Jeannie earlier today.
Okay.
She hasn't
Maybe
seen it
Jeannie,
yet.
if you could just have another look and see if you can track it down, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that will be important to have in front of us.
And Ms. McCauley, in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind screen sharing it, that would be
Sure.
great.
I think it says it's disabled
Okay.
at this point.
Okay, hold on a second.
Sorry.
No problem. There we go.
Still disabled.
Okay. Jeannie, it still seems to be disabled. Do you mind sharing it again? Screen sharing again. There we go.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
So this is called the cognitive model, and it shows that reading comprehension is the ultimate goal on the far right. And then it shows the 3 pathways that feed into that and the sub skills that feed into each one of those pathways. So when we talk about a dyslexia screener, what we're really looking at is part of pathway 1, not even pathway 1 in its entirety, because we're not talking about print concepts and we're not talking about fluency within context, which is like continuous text and authentic reading. So we're really just kind of focusing on 2 little areas of what a reader needs to integrate in order to read for meaning. So I think it's really important that we keep in mind that reading, as I mentioned, is really complex, and it's about orchestrating all of these different skills, and that we can't neglect one area or any of the skills when we are supporting readers on their instructional journey. This model does not take into account spelling and writing, but we know that those are reciprocal processes, and we can use the information in these pathways to also support students in their spelling and their writing. Currently, the dyslexia screeners that are available that might be part of the bill, S75, address several components of pathway 1, as I mentioned, but they neglect the other pathways in its entirety. In addition, the proposed screener does not address the need for the reader to experience reading instruction in context and to apply reading skills in continuous text. In other words, the reader will only get to the rehearsal and never the performance of reading. And according to the International Dyslexia Association, a purpose for a screener is to provide a quick and targeted assessment of discrete skills that indicate whether students are making adequate progress in reading achievement. And our concern is that given the statement, the focus will be on skills in isolation rather than the expectation that the student learn the skills and apply them to the actual act of reading text, where language and vocabulary are not controlled. So that's one point we would like for you all to consider. Our second point is, according to the Agency of the Education's Framework for Implementation of Act 173 and the AOE MTSS Field Guide, all school districts in the state of Vermont are required to have a local assessment plan that includes a variety of assessments that address all the pathways of reading and are given at multiple points throughout the school year for the purpose of benchmarking student progress. These local assessment plans should be the initial starting point for the discussion to dig further into a student's reading profile with additional assessments. The process of digging deeper may well include a dyslexia screener at some point, but a dyslexia screener should not be a starting point to evaluate a student's reading strengths and weaknesses. The assessments included in a robust local assessment plan serve as both screeners and diagnostics. And I can talk more about that, meaning we have assessments on our local assessment plan that are benchmarks that let us know if students are meeting the grade level expectations for the different times of the year, but they go beyond numbers and they allow us to dig deeper to determine where students in fact are going awry and what additional information we needed to collect in order to support them on their journey as readers. The proposed dyslexia screener does not provide that diagnostic information that we need to strengthen our tier 1 and our tier 2 instruction. So those are some of our points that we wanted to present to all of you. And I think Jackie's going to share out some of our recommendations.
Great.
Some of our recommendations, oh, go ahead. You have a question?
Does somebody have a question?
Yeah,
Senator Perswick, please.
I had a question on the required assessment plans. Is that something, like who checks to see if what the plan says? Is that something that the superintendent does or something that the agency does?
That's a good question. In our district currently, the literacy coaches, Jackie, and in the past literacy committees have all looked at our assessment plan to ensure that we are measuring all areas of reading and that our assessments allow us to not only determine if students are on the right trajectory, but also can be used to inform our instruction. As we know, every time we assess, we're taking away from instructional time. So we want our assessments to serve dual purpose. So we're not taking away time that should be spent with our students, giving them what they need.
So if the school didn't have a literacy coach, because that's my understanding that they all don't have those, and I assume they also don't all have literacy committees, which I see is one of your recommendations. It could be that they don't really have an assessment plan because there's nobody really checking to, even though they're required to have one. Is that kind of one of the problems perhaps?
I think that could be, very well could be, and that's kind of one of our recommendations, that every district has a literacy committee that looks really carefully at the assessments being done and ensuring that the assessments that are selected do in fact measure the different areas of reading that we know to be important for students to be college and career ready at the end of their time in school.
Okay, thank you.
Senator.
Thank you. So when do these assessments begin now? I mean, kids are reading a lot earlier than I remember kids reading when I was a kid 100 years ago. So when do the assessments begin?
Our assessments begin currently in kindergarten, although we are talking about pushing a phonological screener into our pre-K at the end of the year. And in kindergarten, they start in the fall where they are assessed in their concepts of print, which is their book handling skills. So they understand how print works, that you read from left to right, the concept of a letter versus a word, understanding of punctuation, those kinds of things. In addition, we assess phonological awareness, and we kind of save the phonemic awareness for the middle of the year. We also assess their high frequency word knowledge, their sight word knowledge, which we know is really important to being an automatic reader. So you have the headspace to think deeply about a text. And I think that's it for the fall, or for kindergarten. And then come winter, we do the same assessments and we add a running record to see how the students can integrate all of that into continued text and their ability to comprehend at the 3 levels of thinking. But they begin in kindergarten.
So to go back to my concern about kids falling through the cracks. I mean, it seems as if this is very early. We're beginning to assess the needs of these children, these students, and I would hope theoretically that no one would fall through the cracks because you'd be beginning at an early enough date.
That is our intention. And I think it goes back to how we use our data and the time we have to dig deep and then think about that tier 1 instruction as was mentioned before and how crucial that is. And then the follow-up piece of progress monitoring our students to ensuring that they are on the right track and not waiting for the next screening window to determine if they're making the kinds of gains that we hope to see.
Okay. Thank you.
And senators, what you're going to hear in our recommendations is it's actually the work that we've done. We've done extensive work on establishing a guaranteed and viable curriculum that is taught on a common sequence across all of our grade levels, that is vertically articulated and aligned. Ms. McCauley mentioned our comprehensive local assessment system that again is also aligned. It's aligned both horizontally and vertically across all of our schools, and we are seeing results. Even during the pandemic and during the closure, when our teachers were focusing on the essential standards in the guaranteed viable curriculum, we actually saw that those standards that we're focused on, we did not see gaps in our readers, our young readers, and we also applied the same to our mathematics system. So we know that this works. This is aligned with the most current, efficacious research-based practices on collective teacher efficacy, and building those comprehensive multi-tiered systems of supports. So again, our recommendations are that all districts convene a literacy committee. We do have one in Essex Westford, and to examine current local assessment plans and ensure that there's a broad range of diagnostic assessments and screeners that address all of the pathways, as Ms. McCauley mentioned, of reading named in that graphic. Build the capacity of teachers by providing professional development on the administration and scoring of all assessments on the revised local assessment plan. Our coaches in Essex Westford, we've expanded our coaching team. We have coaches that are assigned to very narrow grade level spans. And what that allows is for the coaches to develop deep expertise and work very closely. As Ms. McCauley mentioned, she works exclusively with our kindergarten and first grades. We also have coaches who work exclusively with second, third, and fourth and fifth grades. And that really does enable us to deepen our practices and our understandings around what works for our students. We provide professional development on phonological development and its impact on later reading development to ensure that all readers have the necessary oral language base to access grade level reading instruction. This should include teachers pre-K through grade 5. We are about to roll out a comprehensive local professional development plan that actually incorporates a course that our teachers in EWSD will be participating in, that Ms. McCauley and her colleagues on the coaching team will be teaching. This will be something that we introduce prior to the school year, but then teachers will be engaging in this opportunity as the school year goes on. So it will be truly embedded professional development with the coaching team as they move on through their guaranteed viable curriculum and the formative assessments and summative assessment plan. So again, we're looking at step 4, that continuing to build that expertise of teachers and the instructional capacity of the district through that embedded professional development model that we have designed, and provide additional professional development on the reciprocal processes of writing and spelling as related to the reading pathways. I'm actually doing the screen share right now, so I'm going to stop. And I would also like to, if there is time, talk about not just literacy in particular, but talk about the systemic components that we are working toward in Essex Westford to have in place, again, for all of our classrooms in our district. So if there's time to do that.
I do have a question, and others may also while we're on this. So how are you, and you may have covered this, one of the things we have been concerned about is that there are so many third graders that aren't reading and writing at grade level. So I'd like to know where your students are at right now, and where were they, and where are you hoping that they will be, and just talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, in Essex Westford, as part of our continuous improvement plan, we do have the goal that all students will be reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. I will tell you that it was just at the beginning of last year that we really began to develop this comprehensive systemic approach in that collective efficacy and alignment work. So as far as closing the gap at this point, we are seeing positive effects, as I mentioned, especially around the essential standards that we have focused on. We know that a guaranteed viable curriculum really is dependent on having those most essential learnings defined at each grade level. And so that means that the essential standards that we focus on, those are the standards that our intervention programs are focused on at tier 2, as well as our special education services. So we are working to align, as Kate mentioned, there's first instruction that is guaranteed for all students. So we are no longer in EWSD having students pulled away from first grade level instruction to receive additional intervention. Some of you may know that that has been a common practice in education for many, many years. It's a bit antiquated, and what we know, again, research-based is the most efficacious. So in addition to aligning the work of the Guaranteed Viable Curriculum, we have also aligned our resources, i.e. the resource of time, again, to guarantee that all students receive that first instruction, because you can imagine that if you hope to close the gaps and have all students reading on grade level by the end of grade 3, then students must be receiving grade level instruction as well as the supplemental instruction in the skills that they need to be able to access that instruction, but not at the same time as that instruction is happening. So again, in our district, what we're doing is working with intention to align our schedules so that interventionists can work with students outside of first instruction. You did ask me about the data and what that's showing. Again, we are seeing the promise of this work, and I could certainly come back to you with a more detailed data inventory if that's something that you'd like to see.
I think my question would be, how many years, well, I guess really 3. I mean, if you're starting right now at pre-K, by the time pre-K students and you have this underway, by the time those those young kids are third graders, you'll really start to see a group of students that have gone through this entire new system.
Exactly, right. So it will take some time. So we are working on, again, closing the gaps for students who have them currently and preventing them for our youngest learners.
Senator,
I'm just curious to know when you find time for the interventionists, when, you know, the kids are in the classroom and then they need more help. So where is that? How are you adding more time to the days? Because I'd love to learn how to add more time to the days.
Right. So yeah, right. Yeah, Senator Hooker, it's definitely something that's been a collaborative effort that's taken a lot of thought, and it's been a lot of hard work. We are truly focusing on literacy and math, and we've had to extend our literacy blocks in some situations. And that has, again, because this is a priority for us, you know, we resource what we value. And so we have extended literacy blocks in our buildings, and it takes the place of other things, but to an end, we feel it is very valuable. So. Yeah.
So,
Senator Lyons.
yeah, so it's extremely people intensive, human capital intensive.
Absolutely.
What you're doing, yeah.
Mhm.
And it sounds like an amazing model. We've heard about some other school districts that are deeply embedded in work on literacy and building their programs. But if we were to look across the state, or even in just in Chittenden County, how many school districts would have a similar program and motivation to do what you're doing? Is it happening other places, I guess, is the question, because what you're doing is really amazing.
Well, thank you for that, Senator Lyons. I appreciate that. It is definitely a distributive leadership effort. And it is very labor intensive, but it is work that is we are proud of. And but again, it's a systemic approach, and I do want to talk with you a little bit about how we've been able to do that. I'm not really sure where my colleagues are, you know, in the other surrounding districts. I know that we're all very passionate about this work, but I do believe that we are coming at it from maybe a little bit of a different lens, but we're all aligning to that what we know is most efficacious, and that's that collective teacher efficacy. I think that districts may be just at different places within the work. So we are, but we have been very intentional about aligning our work to, again, one particular model, and that's blending the professional learning community model with the RTI at Work model. And about a year and a half ago, we did do the work of cross-referencing the this model that we're currently using with the VT MTSS model to ensure that we had all of those systemic components that is in Vermont MTSS. And we do. But again, I think the way that we're approaching it and really looking at the comprehensive resource allocation, again, resource not only of funding, but resource of time, resource of personnel, material, all of those things are really factoring into the successful model for our community.
Any other questions? I think this has been very helpful. Thank you both very much, and Ms. Lundin as well. We'll continue on this theme a little bit. We're going to hear from some more parents probably next week, and when Senator Terenzini, the lead sponsor, is back on this bill. And we'll likely have you back for additional conversations around literacy. And hopefully when we're all vaccinated, we can come and see the two of you and Ms. Lundin in person and see some of the incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah, we would love to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, why don't we, I'm going to be pulled out of committee by Senator Kitchell at 4. I've asked Jeannie to do some rescheduling, but we will hear from Mark Pearl today on the fiscal note for 426. But in the meantime, why don't we just take a 5-minute break, stretch? We've been at it for a little while, and then come back.